Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the briefing room, her boots polished to a mirror shine despite the grueling morning training session. Around her, 23 other candidates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of exhaustion heavy in the air. The smell of salt water and sweat clung to everyone, a constant reminder of the brutal ocean training they had just completed. Commander Jackson walked to the front of the room, his weathered face bearing the scars of countless missions. His eyes swept across the group before settling on Sarah. She could feel the familiar weight of scrutiny, the same look she had received from every instructor since arriving at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility 6 months ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Jackson began, his voice carrying the authority of decades in special operations. "Today marks the end of Phase 2 of your training. For most of you, this represents a significant milestone. However, not all of you will be continuing to Phase 3. Sarah's heart began to pound, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this moment would come. From day one, whispers had followed her through the barracks, the mess hall, and every training exercise. The other candidates had been respectful, but distant, unsure how to interact with the first woman to make it this far in the program. "Chen!" Commander Jackson called out. "Step forward!" The room fell silent except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Sarah walked to the front, her steps measured and confident despite the uncertainty churning in her stomach. Behind her, she could hear the soft murmur of her fellow candidates, their speculation barely contained. "Lieutenant Chen," the commander continued, "your performance during the obstacle course training has been satisfactory. Your academic scores are above average. Your physical fitness meets our standards." He paused, studying her face for any reaction. "However, there have been concerns raised about your integration with the team dynamic." Sarah felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. She had anticipated this moment for weeks, ever since she noticed the instructors having hushed conversations whenever she approached. The team dynamic was military speak for the discomfort some felt about having a woman in what had traditionally been an all-male environment. "Sir, with respect," Sarah replied, her voice steady, "I have completed every exercise alongside my fellow candidates. My completion times are consistently in the top quartile of the class." Commander Jackson nodded slowly. "That may be true, Lieutenant. But this program isn't just about individual achievement. It's about building units that can operate seamlessly under the most extreme conditions." He gestured to the other candidates. "These men will need to trust each other with their lives. They need to know that everyone on their team can carry their weight when things get difficult." "I understand that, sir," Sarah said, feeling the familiar fire building in her chest. "And I believe I have demonstrated my commitment to this team every day since I arrived." The commander walked to his desk and picked up a manila folder. Sarah's name was written across the tab in neat block letters. 3 weeks ago, during the night navigation exercise, candidate Morrison fell behind the group. You stayed back to help him, which resulted in both of you missing the checkpoint deadline. Sarah remembered that night vividly. Morrison had twisted his ankle on the rocky terrain, and the group had begun to pull ahead in the darkness. She had made a split-second decision to stay with him rather than abandon a teammate. "That decision cost your entire team points in the exercise," Commander Jackson continued. "Some of the other instructors see this as evidence that your presence creates complications that wouldn't otherwise exist." "Sir," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength, "I would make the same decision again. No one gets left behind. That's what you taught us on day 1. The room remained silent. But Sarah could sense the tension building among the other candidates. She knew that some of them had questioned her decision that night, wondering if she had stayed behind because Morrison was struggling or because she herself was having difficulty keeping up. Commander Jackson closed the folder and set it down. "Lieutenant Chen, effective immediately, you are being transferred out of this program. Your belongings will be packed and ready for transport within the hour." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 6 months of the most challenging training she had ever experienced, 6 months of proving herself day after day, and it was ending like this. She had known the possibility existed, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel devastatingly real. "Sir," she said, struggling to keep her voice level, "I request the opportunity to speak with the program director before this decision becomes final." "The decision is final, Lieutenant," Commander Jackson replied. "Your new orders are being processed as we speak." Behind her, Sarah could hear chairs shifting as the other candidates tried to process what they were witnessing. She knew that some of them respected her determination and skill, while others had always viewed her as an outsider who didn't belong in their elite fraternity. "One more thing, Chen," the commander added. "You'll need to turn in all issued equipment before your departure. That includes your training rifle." Sarah felt a cold sensation in the pit of her stomach. Her training rifle had been her constant companion throughout the program, meticulously maintained and zeroed to her specifications. More than that, it represented something personal that none of the instructors or candidates knew about. "Sir, regarding the rifle," she began, then stopped herself. She had never spoken about her background to anyone at the facility. Her military record showed her previous assignment as a military police officer, which was technically accurate but didn't tell the complete story. "What about the rifle, Chen?" Commander Jackson asked, his tone suggesting impatience. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her fellow candidates. These men had trained beside her for months, but none of them really knew who she was or where she had come from before arriving at the facility. The military had a way of creating fresh starts, allowing people to be judged on their current performance rather than their past achievements or failures. "Nothing, sir," she said finally. "I'll turn in all equipment as requested." But as she stood there facing the end of her dream, Sarah knew that her rifle told a story that would change everything if it came to light. The question was whether she was willing to reveal that story, even as she was being pushed out the door. As the other candidates filed out of the briefing room to continue their training, Sarah remained standing at attention, her mind racing through the options that lay before her. The rifle was currently secured in the armory, marked with her name and candidate number. Soon, someone would retrieve it and log it back into inventory. When they did, they would discover something that none of the instructors expected to find. Something that would make them question not just their decision about Sarah, but everything they thought they knew about the quiet lieutenant who had tried so hard to blend in with the group. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the briefing room as Sarah finally broke her position and headed toward the door. In a few hours, she would be on a transport vehicle heading to her next assignment, another chapter of her military career closing behind her. But she had a feeling that this story wasn't over yet. The rifle in the armory held secrets that could change everything, and soon those secrets would come to light whether she chose to reveal them or not. The only question was whether the revelation would come too late to change the decision that had already been made. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she made her way back to the barracks. The other candidates were still in training, practicing close-quarters combat techniques in the gymnasium. She could hear the distant sound of their shouts and the impact of bodies hitting mats, a reminder of the world she was being forced to leave behind. Her bunk was exactly as she had left it that morning, with military precision that had become second nature over the years. The few personal items she was allowed to keep were arranged neatly in her footlocker: a few letters from home, a photograph of her younger brother in his army uniform, and a small leather journal where she recorded her thoughts during the most challenging days of training. As Sarah began folding her uniforms, she thought about the phone call she would need to make to her family. Her parents had been so proud when she told them about being accepted into the program. Her father, a retired Marine, had understood the significance of the opportunity, even if he worried about the challenges she would face. The sound of boots in the hallway interrupted her packing. Sergeant Williams appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Sarah had always respected Williams, who served as the senior enlisted advisor for their training class. Unlike some of the other instructors, he had never treated her differently because of her gender. "Chen," he said, stepping into the room, "I heard about the decision. I wanted to talk to you before you left." Sarah continued folding her uniforms, unsure how to respond. "There's nothing to discuss, Sergeant. The decision has been made." Williams closed the door behind him and moved closer. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "I've been doing some checking on your background. Your personnel file is pretty thin on details about your previous assignment." Sarah's hands paused in their folding motion. She had hoped that her past would remain buried in classified files, far from the curious eyes of training instructors. "My previous assignment was military police, as stated in my file." "That's true," Williams said. "But it's not the whole truth, is it?" The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of training continuing outside. Sarah could feel the sergeant's eyes studying her face, looking for any sign of reaction. She had become skilled at controlling her expressions during her years in special operations. But Williams was perceptive. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Sergeant," she replied, resuming her packing. Williams sat down on the bunk across from her. 3 years ago, there was an operation in Afghanistan, a high-value target extraction that went sideways when the team was ambushed. The official report lists several casualties, but it also mentions an unnamed sniper who provided overwatch and eliminated multiple enemy targets, allowing the extraction team to complete their mission. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. That operation had been classified at the highest levels, and the details weren't supposed to be available to training instructors at the facility. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me," she said, though her voice carried less conviction than before. Williams smiled slightly. "The thing about classified operations is that they leave paper trails, even when they're not supposed to. I have friends in intelligence who owe me favors." He leaned forward. "The unnamed sniper in that report was a military police officer who had been temporarily attached to special operations for the mission, a Lieutenant Sarah Chen." The silence stretched between them as Sarah considered her options. She had spent 3 years keeping her special operations experience hidden, allowing people to see only what was in her official personnel file. It had been easier to blend in, to avoid the questions and assumptions that came with her background. "Even if that were true," she said finally, "it doesn't change what happened here today." "Doesn't it?" Williams stood up. "You know what I think happened? I think you've been holding back during training. I think you've been trying so hard to fit in and not draw attention to yourself that you haven't shown anyone what you're really capable of." Before Sarah could respond, another voice called from the hallway. "Sergeant Williams, we need you in the armory." Williams stepped to the door and spoke with someone in the hallway that Sarah couldn't see. When he returned, his expression had changed completely. "Chen," he said, his voice urgent, "there's something you need to see." Sarah followed Williams down the hallway toward the armory, her mind racing through possibilities. The armory was where all training weapons were stored and maintained, including the rifles that each candidate was assigned for marksmanship training. Inside the armory, she found Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez standing next to a table where her training rifle lay disassembled. Rodriguez looked up as they entered, his expression a mixture of confusion and surprise. "Chen," Rodriguez said, "I was cleaning your rifle for inventory when I found something unusual." He pointed to the rifle's scope mount. "There are small marks etched into the metal here. At first, I thought they were just scratches from training, but when I looked closer..." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized what Rodriguez had discovered. During her deployment in Afghanistan, it had been common practice among snipers to mark their confirmed kills on their equipment. She had been so careful to transfer those marks to any new rifle she was assigned, a personal tradition that connected her to her service overseas. These aren't random scratches, Rodriguez continued, his voice growing more serious. These are kill marks, 18 of them. Williams stepped closer to examine the marks, his expression shifting from curiosity to amazement. 18 confirmed kills? Sarah stood frozen, knowing that her carefully maintained secret was now exposed. The small etched lines on her scope mount told a story that contradicted everything the instructors thought they knew about her background and capabilities. "Where did these come from, Chen?" Rodriguez asked, his voice demanding an answer. Before Sarah could respond, the armory door opened again, and Commander Jackson entered. He had clearly been summoned by one of the other men, and his expression suggested he was not pleased with the interruption to his schedule. "What's so important that it couldn't wait until morning?" he demanded. Rodriguez gestured to the rifle. "Sir, you need to see this. Chen's rifle has 18 kill marks etched into the scope mount." Commander Jackson's expression changed immediately. He moved to the table and examined the rifle carefully, his experienced eyes taking in the precise markings that Sarah had so carefully maintained. "These are sniper kills," he said quietly, more to himself than to the others in the room. Sarah realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue to maintain her silence, allowing them to draw their own conclusions about the marks. Or she could finally tell the truth about her background and risk exposing everything she had worked to keep hidden. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind, "I can explain those marks." Commander Jackson looked up from the rifle, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she had never seen before. "I think you'd better, Lieutenant, because if these marks are legitimate, then we've made a significant error in judgment." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Sarah to speak. Outside, the sound of training continued, but inside the armory, the discovery of 18 small marks had brought everything to a standstill. Sarah looked at each of the men in turn, knowing that whatever she said next would change everything. The secret she had guarded for 3 years was now exposed, and there was no going back to the anonymity she had carefully cultivated. "Those marks represent confirmed kills during my deployment in Afghanistan," she said quietly. "I was attached to a special operations team as a designated marksman for 8 months. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Commander Jackson continued to stare at the rifle, as if the small marks might reveal more secrets if he looked at them long enough. 8 months in special operations," he said finally. "And you never mentioned this during your application process." "No, sir," Sarah replied. "I didn't think it was relevant to the training program." Williams let out a low whistle. 18 confirmed kills in 8 months. That's not just relevant, Chen. That's extraordinary. The following morning brought an unusual quiet to the training facility. Word had spread quickly through the ranks about the discovery in the armory, and Sarah found herself at the center of conversations she couldn't hear but could feel happening around every corner. She had spent a sleepless night in the temporary quarters where she had been moved, waiting for official word about what would happen next. At 0600 hours, Sergeant Williams appeared at her door with new orders. "Chen, report to the program director's office immediately." Sarah had never been inside Captain Morrison's office, though she had seen the program director from a distance during several formal ceremonies. The office was larger than she had expected, with walls lined with commendations, photographs from various deployments, and a display case containing weapons from different eras of special operations. Captain Morrison was standing behind his desk when she entered, studying a thick file that Sarah recognized as her complete military record. Unlike the abbreviated version that had been available to the training instructors, this file contained every classified detail of her service history. "Sit down, Lieutenant," Captain Morrison said without looking up. "We have a lot to discuss." Sarah took the chair across from his desk and waited as he continued reading. Through the window behind him, she could see the other candidates beginning their morning physical training. their synchronized movements a reminder of the precision and teamwork that define the program. "I've been on the phone for most of the night," Captain Morrison said finally, closing the file and meeting her eyes. "Talking to your previous commanding officers, intelligence officials, and a few other people whose names I can't mention." He leaned back in his chair. "The picture that emerged is quite different from what we had in your training file." Sarah remained silent, unsure whether she was being prepared for another dismissal or something else entirely. 3 years ago, you were handpicked for a classified operation because of your exceptional marksmanship scores during military police training," the captain continued. "You spent 8 months attached to a special operations team, during which time you not only provided overwatch for multiple high-risk missions, but also completed advanced sniper training that most of our candidates here don't receive until after graduation." He opened another folder and spread several photographs across his desk. Sarah recognized them immediately. Mission photos from Afghanistan showing her in full sniper gear, positioned on rooftops and mountainous terrain that had provided perfect vantage points for protecting ground teams. 18 confirmed kills, Captain Morrison said, tapping one of the photos. "But that's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is that every single one of those kills was made under extreme pressure, often at distances exceeding 800 meters, and always in situations where missing the shot would have resulted in friendly casualties." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest as memories of those missions flooded back. Each mark on her rifle scope represented not just a successful shot, but a moment when she had held the lives of her teammates in her hands. "Why didn't you include any of this in your application for this program?" the captain asked. "Sir," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully, "I wanted to be evaluated on my performance here, not on my previous experience. I thought that including my special operations background would create unfair expectations or assumptions about my capabilities." Captain Morrison nodded slowly. "And you were probably right. If we had known about your background from the beginning, you would have been treated differently by both instructors and candidates. You wanted to prove that you belonged here on the same terms as everyone else." "Yes, sir. The problem is that by hiding your background, you also hid capabilities that are directly relevant to this program. Your instructors made their evaluation based on incomplete information." The door to the office opened, and Commander Jackson entered, followed by Sergeant Williams. Both men looked as though they had gotten as little sleep as Sarah had. "Lieutenant Chen," Commander Jackson said, taking a position next to Captain Morrison's desk, "I owe you an apology. The decision to remove you from the program was based on concerns about your ability to perform under pressure and integrate with a special operations team. Those concerns were clearly unfounded." Captain Morrison gestured to the photographs on his desk. "These images show you operating successfully with one of the most elite special operations teams in our military. The fact that you were able to transition back to a regular military police assignment and then excel in our training program demonstrates exactly the kind of adaptability we're looking for." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "Sir, does this mean the decision is being reconsidered?" "The decision has already been reversed," Captain Morrison said firmly. "As of this morning, you are reinstated to the program. However, there are going to be some changes to how your training proceeds." He stood up and moved to the window overlooking the training area. "Your fellow candidates are about to learn about your background. Some of them will be impressed, others might feel deceived, and a few might question whether you've been holding back during training exercises." "Sir, I never held back during training," Sarah said quickly. "I gave maximum effort in every exercise." "I believe that," Captain Morrison replied, "but there's a difference between maximum effort and maximum capability. Your sniper training gives you skills that haven't been tested here because we don't introduce advanced marksmanship until later in the program." Sergeant Williams spoke up. "We're accelerating your training timeline. Starting today, you'll be participating in advanced exercises that are typically reserved for the final phase of the program. We need to properly evaluate your current capabilities. Sarah felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. She had been looking forward to the advanced training phases, but she hadn't expected to be thrust into them under these circumstances. "There's one more thing," Captain Morrison said, returning to his desk. "The other candidates deserve to know who they're training with. This afternoon, you'll be briefing the entire class on your Afghanistan deployment and the skills you developed during that assignment." The thought of standing in front of her fellow candidates and revealing everything she had worked to keep hidden was daunting. For months, she had been just another candidate struggling through the same challenges as everyone else. Now, she would be explaining why she had 18 kill marks on her rifle scope. "Sir," she said, "what if this changes the team dynamic that was mentioned as a concern?" Commander Jackson answered this time. "Lieutenant, the team dynamic we were worried about was based on the perception that you were the weak link in the group. That perception was wrong. If anything, your experience makes you a valuable asset to any team." Captain Morrison handed her a new training schedule. "You'll start with advanced reconnaissance exercises this afternoon, followed by long-range marksmanship evaluation tomorrow morning. We need to determine exactly where your skill level stands compared to our program standards." As Sarah looked at the schedule, she realized that her entire experience in the program was about to change dramatically. The anonymity she had maintained was gone, replaced by a level of scrutiny that came with having exceptional capabilities. "One final point," Captain Morrison said as she prepared to leave. "The reason this program exists is to identify and develop the best candidates for special operations. Sometimes those candidates come to us with existing skills, and sometimes they develop those skills here. Either way, our job is to recognize excellence when we see it." Sarah stood and saluted. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." "Lieutenant," he replied, "based on your record, I don't think disappointment is something we need to worry about." As Sarah left the office and walked back toward the barracks, she could see the other candidates finishing their morning training session. In a few hours, she would be standing in front of them explaining who she really was and what she had done before arriving at the facility. The secret she had guarded so carefully was now completely exposed, but instead of feeling vulnerable, Sarah felt a sense of relief she hadn't expected. For the first time since arriving at the program, she wouldn't have to hold back or worry about standing out too much. That afternoon, as she stood before her fellow candidates and began to tell the story of her deployment in Afghanistan, Sarah noticed something interesting in their faces. Instead of the skepticism or resentment she had feared, she saw respect and curiosity. These were all elite military personnel who understood the significance of what she had accomplished. When she finished her briefing and opened the floor for questions, Morrison, the same candidate she had helped during the night navigation exercise, raised his hand. "Chen," he said, "that night when you stayed back to help me, was that because you thought I needed the assistance or because you were applying something you learned in special operations about never leaving a teammate behind?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Both," she replied, "but mostly because it was the right thing to do." The room erupted in a mixture of laughter and agreement, and Sarah realized that the team dynamic Commander Jackson had been worried about was finally coming together, just not in the way anyone had expected. The truth about her capabilities hadn't weakened the team. It had shown them what was possible when individual excellence was combined with collective commitment. 3 weeks later, as Sarah completed her final training exercise and received her graduation certificate, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The secret that had nearly ended her career had ultimately been the key to its continuation, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being willing to reveal who you really are, even when it feels like the most dangerous thing you can do.